We are talking House of Afflictions. This is a low-budget British spooky horror movie directed and written by Anthony M. Winton. This one stars Michelle Darkin-Price, and she plays an author who has had some tragedy in her life. Her young daughter has disappeared at an early age and, never to be seen, assumed to have been kidnapped or murdered or something. She is obviously distraught about this and seeks refuge for her, kind of try and get a little bit of sanctuary to herself to do her writing, as she's an author. Kind of wants to get away from distractions. So she hires this kind of like old country cottage to kind of try and get away from it and kind of get her work done. But when she's there, she seems to be menaced by some paranormal activity. There seems to be some type of malicious spirit within this house that kind of wants to affect her. And, it's all kind of like the classic kind of ghost story kind of stuff here. Doors shutting, things moving, strange sounds, all that kind of stuff. Now, as the movie progresses, things get progressively worse. What happens? Well, you have to watch the movie to find out. So this movie is actually set in the 70s. So we have, we have no reason to people using mobile phones and stuff like that. So it's all kind of like, old school technology, which I think works quite well. I do feel it kind of captures a sort of a bygone era. So they do a good job here of making it feel like it's actually in a certain time period. Maybe the haircuts could have been a little bit more shaggy, I would say, but other than that. But I feel the house here that they've used for their kind of location shooting is a great house. It kind of really looks kind of, very kind of gothic looking, but also kind of quirky in certain ways. I like the house. I thought the actual kind of technical side of this movie was, for the most part, pretty good. I think the camera work was good. I think there was some kind of quite nice use of positioning, stuff like that. I thought the actual, the lighting, all that kind of stuff, use of kind of shadow within this house was quite clever. So on the technical side of stuff, there were things that certainly worked in this movie. And the movie actually has an interesting kind of idea here. Now, the title House of Afflictions basically refers to it's not necessarily, the house that's going to be bad or whatever, but it's things that have gone on within this house and the people within it that ultimately cause maybe a haunted house to be seen as somewhat kind of bad or evil or what have you. So there's an idea there that I think is worth exploring. But what doesn't work for this film? So for me, the number one thing here is the acting. Now, I won't out and out say it's bad acting, because here's the thing. We spent most of our time with Kate, who was our main character, played by Michelle Darkin-Price. Now, she strikes me as someone who has done a lot of amateur theatre, because what I found was the acting was very theatre acting. And what do I mean by that? It's lots of kind of like, sort of like maybe overdoing it slightly. So when you're doing it live in front of an audience and stuff, and you have to kind of communicate stuff to, a large kind of crowd of people, you have to kind of like over-exaggerate things slightly. And that's how I felt the acting came across in this movie. For example, the over-exaggerated kind of like hand movements, oh my God, things like that. It was just a little bit too much, and the kind of the way she kind of spoke and stuff like that. It's not just her, there are other casts that do it as well. So I feel maybe the cast of this have come from a kind of amateur theatre background, and I feel like they're still doing that kind of style of acting, but on film. So that was the first thing that I feel doesn't quite work. Don't be expecting to see anything really on screen. I feel this movie makes the mistake of showing you a lot of stuff off screen, if that makes sense. Now, in some instances, I feel that can work, but I felt maybe you kind of got a little bit of blue balls ultimately from this movie because of it, because it kind of, I think maybe through budget restraints, can't really show you too much, but it comes a little frustrating. Now, I like the idea of the premise of this film, but when everything is revealed, I think it doesn't quite make sense. Without going into spoilers here, we have an antagonist, and when that's revealed, and you think back about what's happened and the fate of certain people, where they were, thinking, hang on a second, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't kind of translate to what's actually kind of gone on screen. So I feel here there's some plot holes. I can't really say anything more than that, otherwise I'll kind of spoil it. But suffice to say, I do feel like some stuff here didn't really kind of feel like it particularly made sense. We're talking about ghosts and supernatural stuff, so, you know, even within that kind of parameters, I feel that this movie still has a kind of some logic issues. And when it's all said and done, I feel this movie may be a little dull for some people. It's a slow build. It's a very kind of classic British style kind of ghost story. The sort of dramas that you would see on the kind of the BBC probably in the 70s and 80s. Maybe doesn't have the kind of the visceral impact that you do have on kind of today's modern kind of horror scene. And then there are certainly an audience for that. I still quite enjoy that sort of style movie, but I can see that some people may find there's just not much there. And when I think you couple that with somewhat of an amateur feel, and when you kind of don't have so much kind of to see on screen, it makes it for somewhat of a kind of like a disappointing fare. It's certainly not a bad film. Like I said, if you like classic ghost stories, the kind of like the, you know, Christmas Carol, that kind of stuff, then you may like this. It don't do with the Christmas Carol, but it's just an example. So it's pretty forgettable. I've got to say, I don't think it really stood out in any particular way, but there's certainly aspects here that I feel could appeal to certain audiences. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.